Hello, world, and welcome to the world debut of the Alex Montoya podcast. What's good with Alex Montoya? I am so excited to have you here, and thank you to anyone who is listening or watching and really seeing me be able to accomplish a great blessing. Glory be to God, and a dream come true in having the debut of the podcast. I am Alex Montoya, and for those of you who I haven't met, I want to welcome you and also let you know the purpose of this podcast. I am a writer and public speaker and now podcaster. And my company, A Motivational Communications, is all about showing that you can overcome adversity and you can overcome any sort of challenges to be able to succeed in this world. Likewise, I run a foundation, the Alex Montoya Foundation, that promotes the stories of people with disabilities and also immigrants to show that those of us that in society may overcome a few more challenges than others have a story to tell and want to be able to contribute great things to this country as well. I want to make sure that this podcast is really highlighting people that are doing good in the world and that are successful, but also in helping others be successful in the world. You know, there's a lot of negative news and a lot of bad news in the world today, and I simply want to show what's good. I would be remiss, first of all, if I didn't thank the sponsor that is making today possible. This podcast is brought to you by Gomez Trial Attorneys. Contact them for your personal injury, employment, and civil rights matters. Reach out to getgomez.com or 833-GET-GOMEZ. And I can tell those of you that are listening and watching, if you are looking for a podcast studio, reach out to them as well. We are in their office podcast studio, which is beautiful, and my guest here can attest to that. It is one of the most detailed, beautiful, and beautifully decorated studios we've ever seen. So, yes, they are a very cherished sponsor of the Alex Montoya podcast. And if you need a podcast studio, reach out to them as well. And just so you know, to make this podcast possible, we are also looking for sponsors as well. So if you're interested in that, please reach out to me. So my first guest for today's podcast for the world launch, sounds so fancy, right? The world launch is Abe Camacho. And I'll let you hear a little bit more of his story through him in a minute, but I want to kind of explain a couple things for anyone that's listening today as to who Abe is and why I invited him to be our first guest. First of all, I believe that as a Christian, and Pastor Abe has talked about this before, what you make a priority is not what you do the most in life, but what you do first. And I believe, you know, a very popular saying is always put God first in everything. And so I don't want it to just be a saying. I want to walk the walk as well. So I wanted today's podcast, the very first one, to be dedicated to the Lord, to a man of God, to really be godly principles and godly wisdom. So that was kind of one of the main goals. And we're going to have fun as well and talk about non-spiritual issues. But I really wanted this first episode to have a spiritual intent, I guess you could say. But also, I really, truly believe in this man. He is the head pastor and founding pastor of local church San Diego, of which I am a proud member of, been a proud member of for the last 4 years. And I believe that the day will come when me interviewing Abe today is going to be the equivalent of somebody interviewing a young Miles McPherson or a young Stephen Furtick, a young Joel Osteen. I believe Abe is very much on that path. And so, believe me, you guys are going to see. Someday you guys are going to be like, wow, you interviewed Pastor Abe back then? And I'll be like, yeah, it's the only time I can afford him. So you will see. You will see. Excuse me. The other component with that is One of the reasons that I feel that way about Abe is I'd like to tell you guys a quick story of how I met him. In 2019, and hard to believe that was 6 years ago, I was going through a very hard time in my life. My mom had just passed away, and I was really suffering through depression and anxiety. And I was just about a couple years into running my own motivational communications business. It really wasn't going so well. And I walked past a church in downtown San Diego where I live, and I heard some praise and worship music going on. And what was wild was this was a Thursday night in the fall. And I thought, I don't know of any churches that have services in San Diego going on. So I came in, checked it out, and Abe was the guest speaker. He was the guest preacher that night. Because I don't believe you headed up a church at that point, Abe. And so you were considered the guest speaker. And so I listened to him. Now, this was in a warehouse in downtown San Diego. And I mean, it was like walking into a cave. Like I walked in, I was like, what the heck? But I felt called to go in there, and I listened to this gentleman preach. And I kid you guys not, when I heard him speak, the first words that came out of my mouth was, wow, this guy is anointed. This guy is anointed to preach the word of God. Now, you got to understand, I am 50 years old. I've been to many churches. I've been a part of many churches. I've seen tons of pastors online and on TV and in person. And so I've been around the block, you know? And when I heard Abe preach, it was with the most fire and the most passion and intensity that I've ever heard any preacher speak. Yet he was so relatable, and he just broke things down to such a great level that you could understand it. That I was like, this guy is anointed. There's a difference between being a great speaker and a great anointed preacher. And I saw the difference. I was like, this guy is anointed to preach. I want to hear him preach again. And I also thought on that very night, after just hearing him preach for about 40 minutes, I said, this guy is intended to head up a church. And I don't know why I thought that. I don't know why exactly those words came to my mind and came to my heart, but it struck me right away. So I considered it to be a word of God. And mind you, this was a good 2 years away from you actually doing that, Abe. But instantaneously from the time that I met you 6 years ago, I knew you were anointed to preach the word of God, and I knew you were anointed to head up a church. And so here we are. All of it is happening as our audience will hear. And I wanted everyone to kind of know that background before we dive in. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, the very first guest of the Alex Montoya What's Good podcast is Pastor Abe Camacho. Hey.
First of all, Alex, I'm like listening to you talk about me. It doesn't even feel like you're talking about me. You're so kind. Before we even get into it, I'm honored to be the first guest. I am honored I consider you a friend. Yes. I'm honored to be your friend. And man, you're so generous and so kind. And I'm so excited to get into it and have this conversation, and hopefully it blesses some people, and I know we're gonna have a great time.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you for saying that. And I know it was from the heart. So thank you. You're definitely a friend and a brother, my bro. So thank you. So one of the things that I want our audience to know is, in terms of kind of a structure, one thing that you're going to see with this podcast is a lot of people, I mean, we're talking everywhere these days, love to give out opinions and love to give their perspective on things. And then, of course, as an audience, we give our opinions on their opinions. And one of the challenges, I think, with the world today is all of that just kind of spirals down, especially with social media and streaming TV and everything. Everyone's giving their opinions. Everyone's giving their opinions on those opinions. But I believe that it is really impossible to truly understand a person's perspective until you first know their story. You have to know where they came from and what they've experienced to understand why it is they said that they just said. And that goes across the universe. I mean, that's for every single situation. So one of the things that I'm going to try to do with this podcast is, first of all, before we interview people, I want them to know where the guest comes from so they can kind of understand, okay, this is why they think that way. This is what they're saying. I can kind of relate to them a little bit better, as well as this is where they're going in life. I think people need to know other people's intents and missions before they just kind of make a judgment about them. So with you, Abe, tell me a little bit about yourself and where you were born and kind of where you grew up.
Yeah, a little bit about myself, man. We can go all the way back. I was born in Palm Springs, and it was like a fun thing. My parents lived in Mexico at the time,
Okay.
and had moved over. They were here for a season. I happened to be born in the United States, and then we went back to Mexico. So I was raised in Mexico, in Tijuana, Mexico,
Okay.
and I love the culture, love the people. All my family's still in Mexico, and fast forward, I am in, middle school age, and we move over to the States, and it's the culture shock. It's the beginning, right? For me now, I'm living in the States. I'm living in the spaces where I saw on TV people. And now I'm dealing with the dynamic of learning a new language, different culture. My parents do not speak English. I'm in English as a second language classes. So, my first language is Spanish. So I'm trying to catch on. I'm trying to learn. But in that whole new season, there's great new connections, great new friendships, relationships, and it's amazing. So that's kind of a little bit of my background. I came in, and then did the school, graduated high school, went to college, and we come from this Mexican family where we value work. So I started working since I was 15 and a half. I used to work at Ralph's, and I used to work at a carpet cleaning company. And I did that. I didn't really know what I wanted to do because I was never a good student. So, going to school, you have all these paths and you can do whatever you want. But I'm like, I just don't know exactly what it is that I want to do. So I went to work, and getting that job as a carpet cleaner is what really came full circle, because I ended up getting a job as a janitor at a church. And that's really where my journey of faith begins. I grew up in a Christian home, but like most young people, it's your parents' faith, it's not your own. So me being a janitor now for a church, that changed everything. Met my future wife. I really had an encounter with God, and it changed my trajectory forever.
Okay. So hold on right there. So let's back up a little bit. What part of Tijuana did you grow up in?
There's this, over there they're called colonias, like neighborhood. It's called La Libertad. So it's this beautiful, beautiful space by the airport, and great people. I have fond memories of the corner store. We had our own like Mexican version of a Blockbuster, and it was a great time.
Okay. And tell me, when you were growing up there, what was kind of your view of the U.S.? Was it viewed as a faraway land, or was it, as it is for so many people, just kind of two countries that are interconnected, and you take part in both?
Before I moved to the States, America was this. It was just Hollywood. For me, it was just what I saw on TV. It was Seinfeld. It was Sex in the City. It was whatever was on at night. And it was just, I would listen, I would watch all these shows, but like dubbed in Spanish. So for me, it was, I had the picture of Hollywood as America. I never ever thought that we would move over to the States. That was not in the plans. That was something that happened after 9/11. That was something that affected the work situation of my dad, and we had to move, and we came here, and it was never in the plans to do so. And for me, America was like, when I came in here, I felt like I was in a movie. I felt like, oh my God, I'm like a fish out of water in this place, and everybody's so cool, and there's so, and at that point I realized, man, I could do what, the sky's the limit. Like I'm in the land of opportunity. So it was a very exciting time for me.
And I ask you that question because I imagine that there are some people that are listening to this podcast, and perhaps people that are living away from the Southern California or the California Baja region that don't understand that for a good number of us, this region is exactly that. It's a region, and people cross back and forth all the time, and they live in one or both countries. They shop in one or both countries. It's very much a binational region, and I think that reality gets lost sometimes. So I like for people to be able to kind of know the stories of people who do that, who either would go back and forth as they were growing up or made the transition from one country to the other, and for people to see that it's drastic as you said, but it's also kind of just one of our realities of the two nations being so close together. And so when you came over, you were a teenager. You said the middle school years. And what was that like? Were you quickly embraced and made a lot of friends?
You know, I think the people were kind, but there is the stigma that you put on your own self as an outsider, right? There's the language barrier. There's the inability to connect at a cultural level. I did not know the hot artist. I did not know the lingo. I did not know the slang. So I'm trying to be proper, and you find a community within the community, and I think you find what people would call like an in group. So I was in the States, but still my whole community was Hispanic. All my community was the Mexican Americans, and then you start trying to find your way there, right? You're a Chicano, you're a Mexican American. You in the States, you're too Mexican for the Americans. Then you're too American for the Mexicans. So now you're in the middle, right? In this crisis of identity, and everybody was so kind. I don't think especially living in San Diego, where it's very diverse, so everybody's very welcoming. But I put that pressure on myself of man, I feel like I'm an outsider. I feel like I don't belong, and that shaped a lot of my drive and always wanted to perform and do well, because I'm like, man, if I'm gonna fit in, I really do need to stand out, and that was something that really shaped me in those young years.
Interesting. And I gotta say, I can relate to your story in two different ways, Abe. When I moved to this country from Colombia at age 4, same deal. I was a Spanish speaker only. Had to learn the culture, had to learn what sports people watched and who the hot music artists were and what TV shows everybody watched. And I always like to say that I basically learned the language through TV. That I got my ABCs, but also my CBS and my ESPNs all at once. And then what was interesting was came over when I was 4, and originally everybody just knew me as Alejandro. Nobody called me Alex. And it wasn't until I was in the hospital getting my first pair of prosthetics, doing the surgical procedures that I needed to make sure that those fit well. And I'll never forget, a nurse was the one who told me, you know, up here in this country, no one's going to want to call you Alejandro. That's too long. She said, your real name is Alexander. We're calling you Alex. And from that day on, I just became Alex. And it's crazy how something like that can start in such a simple way. But then I can also relate because when you came over and it was your teenage years, I was in one school in here in the Claremont part of San Diego, and then kind of my introduction to the downtown area and kind of the downtown life that really impacted the rest of my life came when I changed schools in 7th grade, and that was like a whole new world because at that point I was fully immersed in the U.S. I could speak English by now, and I certainly knew the culture and all of that. But leaving a group of friends, I don't think people know how important this is. When you leave one group of friends and you all of a sudden have to make a whole new group of friends, for me, the big change was the new group of friends that I met in junior high had never really seen somebody with a disability before, and certainly had never seen somebody with 3 prosthetics. And I bring that up only because, in San Diego, people with disabilities weren't allowed to be on a regular education campus until 1980. So I mean, that was just like yesterday. And in 1980, I was 6 years old. And so everyone of my generation, and I'm 50, and I believe you're 40,
I'm 35.
35. My bad. My bad. My bad. That is my bad all the way. 35. 35. For our generation, we just weren't used to, we weren't exposed to having a lot of people with disabilities as classmates. And so you can imagine, and again, because I'm 15 years older than you can imagine that when I walked in, those kids really hadn't seen somebody. And it was really having to orient them to, yes, you can talk to me. Yes, you can shake my hand, give me a fist bump. Yes, I can play at recess just like you. Yes, you're welcome to ask questions of me. And it was just a whole different orienting of people. And the great thing about kids is they will ask those questions and they will be curious. You just kind of have to give them the green light to know that it's no holds barred. You can do that, but that's such a crucial age. I can absolutely relate, because when you are going through those life changes, at those crucial changes where everyone is awkward as a teenager anyway, everybody is kind of learning about who their future self will be, but to have that extra layer of being either an immigrant or a person with a disability, or perhaps both, it's something very different. And I hope people kind of realize that those that have gone through that or are going through that really can use all the support they can get. So you mentioned you got job as a church janitor, and tell me how that got you involved in the church, and then also how you met your wife.
It's to make the long story short, it's all connected. And I believe that God is so interested in the details, and He orchestrates these moments. Especially, I've seen it more in my life where I feel like nothing is in my control. But now I'm reminded, when it's not in my hands, it's in God's hands. And this was one of those moments, because being a janitor, it's an honorable job, but it's not a job that at 18 years old is something that you're striving to become. But it was just something that for me, it paid the bills, something that I wanted to do. So I became this janitor, and there was this accountant at the church, and beautiful, beautiful girl. And I started doing my thing, started spending extra time in her office, vacuuming, doing the trash. I mean, what could I do? And remember, I'm 18 years old. So if I have, the listener, they're like, they could probably hear my accent at 18 years old. It was pretty tough. It was pretty tough. So, words weren't my forte, but I was trying my thing, saying hello, being kind. And I remember a couple of days later, my supervisor is like, "Hey, like, you can't be talking to that girl." And I'm like, "Why?" And like,
You vacuum here 5 times.
like that's the boss's daughter. And at that point, the boss being the pastor, he came up to me and basically the sentiment was, "Hey, my daughter's not going to be dating no janitor. So if you guys are going to date, let me teach you what I know." And 15 years, fast forward, the pastor, the boss, becomes my father-in-law. That young woman is now my wife of 12 years. We have 2 beautiful daughters, and that was in the church. So we went from janitor to do every job you can think of at church. And that was our schooling. That job was basically our training, without us knowing, to eventually launch our own church and start building our community.
Oh wow, fantastic, fantastic story. And I gotta say this part here, because I think it is the funniest thing that I've ever heard you say on stage, and funniest thing I've ever heard from any stage ever. Your daughters Lux and Tiger, and of course your beautiful wife Crystal. Shout out, Pastor Crystal. You have said before, your daughters call you Papa, and you have said the line. I'm going to say the beginning of the line, and I want you to complete the sentence. You have said, "My daughters call me Papa, but only one lady calls me." Oh wow! I remember when I very first heard Pastor Abe say that, I didn't LOL. I YOL. I yelled out loud. I, I just thought it was so phenomenal. And that's who you are, Abe. You are so authentic, and you weren't afraid to, people think because you're on stage, you got to be prim and proper. And, certainly you got to watch what you say, but you still got to be authentic. And the fact that you said that, and I also love it because, as you know, our church is very young and has very young attendees. To me, it showed people who you were as a man, as a father, as a husband, and you presented yourself as somebody that really they could model after, and I just thought that was the best thing in the world. So I wanted to bring that up. So okay, I told the story earlier of how I mentioned 2019 and I heard you preach, and I kept going back to hear you preach, and that was in the fall of 19 and extended into the spring of 2020. And then the first week of March of 2020, the world stopped. And we were told that we weren't going to be able to have any more church services. And I'll never forget this. At first, we were told it's just 2 weeks. It's only going to be for 2 weeks because of this thing called the coronavirus pandemic. And so, obviously, the halting of services turned out to be longer than that. And so we didn't have services for a while. And within that time period, you began, I guess, planting the seeds of creating local church. Can you tell me about that and how that started?
Yes, that was a difficult time for all of us, in 2020, not only did we get hit with this global pandemic that affected everybody, but internally at the organization that I was working in, there was its own challenges within the leader of our organization, our CEO, who happens to be a father-in-law. There is a moral failure, as we would call it, in what we do, and unfortunately, my in-laws divorce, and they decide to step away from the ministry. And at that moment, I mean, I've served this organization and this leadership for 15 years, full time. This has been my career, my calling, my life. And it was a moment of decision for me because change was happening around me. And every time there's transition, you get to decide, what else, God, are you trying to change? This change isn't just happening around me. Is there something you want to change within me? And I really felt at that moment with my wife, Crystal, that it was time for us to step out and start fresh as well. So March 2020 through November 2020, we stayed, we're praying, we're believing that God is going to give us some sort of sign. In November 2020, we transitioned out of our old organization and we decided, hey, we're going to plant a church in downtown San Diego, which is where we met. This is where my heart was in downtown at that season. And we started gathering in my home around our dinner table with 7 people. And during the pandemic, so there was no physically gathering anywhere. We started doing some videos, putting them on YouTube, and I believe that God really put his hand on it. There was a grace to it. There was something that happened. There was momentum. People were interested. And a few months went by from November 2020, and we decided on June 6th to hold our first service ever. Again, we went back to what we knew. We went back to what the pandemic put a pause on. We got a warehouse in downtown San Diego. We knew 7 people were coming for sure, but we didn't know who else was going to come. And lo and behold, we have a great community to show up and support. And that was 3.5 years ago. What started with 7 people, now we're seeing a couple hundred people in downtown, but not just in downtown. Now we have our second location in Eastlake, seeing a couple hundred people over there in Spanish. And then this Easter, which is in April, we are launching our third service in English in Eastlake. So, I mean, to encourage anybody that is going through those beginning stages, as the Bible says, do not despise the day of small beginnings, because I believe that every great miracle begins with a small seed. So sometimes we reject the small, but I believe that when you care for it, when you really nurture the little that you have, oh my God, like great things can come from it. I'm a witness to that. Our community's a witness to that, and that's why I love being part of beginnings like this podcast. Man, I'm so excited to see what God does with it, and just to see everything that God does with when we're faithful with the little.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I wasn't there for the first service. I think I came. It was still early. I remember it was still spring, kind of early summer. So it was very much still in its infancy. So I like to say, I'm not necessarily a day one, but I'm a near day one. I might have been a day two kind of person. But I was there, and it has really been profound seeing how the church has grown in size, but also in community. And I know one thing that you've talked about before is that we shouldn't measure success by simply the number of people that are sitting in a service. That you can host a good party and have 1,000 people, but really in the work and the fruits that are being produced by that church. And that's always stuck with me. And so I'm curious. I know you kind of mentioned how your father-in-law took you under his wing and kind of said, okay, well, I want to show you a few things. And I know that you transitioned into, I believe, being a youth pastor and a few other things. So when you created Local Church San Diego, and you've got people like Alex Montoya and various other knuckleheads now coming through the doors every Sunday. This thing is real. Like, this thing is happening. At any point, did you ever feel like, wow, what are we doing here? Like, did it ever feel too big?
You know what? I think from the beginning, you want to believe that God's in it. And if God's in it, it's going to be of substantial impact. And again, like you just mentioned, that's part of the way I live my life. There is this list. I love hospitality. It's like my favorite thing to follow. That's like my sport is really hospitality. And that there is the 50 best, and every year they release the list of the 50 best restaurants in the world. And McDonald's is not the number one restaurant ever, because even in the world of real hospitality and excellence, you know that attendance and how many people you can get through the door does not equate to impact or excellence. So for us at the beginning, we said we believe that we want to have a big impact in the lives of people. We want to have a big impact in our city that we love so much. And sometimes you never know who you're speaking to. We have people at our church. For example, this Sunday we had a new member from our new San Diego soccer club that's opening up soon. He walked in through the doors, and he is a player of MLS. So this is, you could say, this is one person, but with thousands and thousands of followers of social media. Right. So, you really cannot engage or really gauge your impact based on how many people are in the room. Is really, you have to think beyond. And when we started local, we knew that was the lane that we were going to stay in. Let's have intimate gatherings, because there's nothing like being able to be in the room and feel the people and shake hands and give hugs, where other organizations in San Diego has the best churches in the world. The Rock, Pastor Miles is my hero, tens of thousands of people. So that already exists. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. Let's be authentically us. And what do we want? We want a space that looks like where we hang out, the coffee shops, the restaurants, the spaces, and create a space that is not intimidating for people that have never been to church before.
Sure. That is great. That is great. And you mentioned a little bit about the upcoming future services, future campuses. Where exactly do you envision the future of local church? What do you want it to be? Where do you want it to go?
I think local church, I really feel like God is calling us to introduce a new way to connect with God. I think the pandemic really marked us, and it's part of our story. And we saw how businesses organizations shifted the way they serve people. But if we're honest, churches haven't really changed in the last few decades. But if it's true that every single person connects with God in a unique way, how come there isn't more diverse ways to do church? So what I see in the future for local is for us to really pioneer a new way of doing church and doing community that may not look like quote unquote your grandma's church, not because it's not traditional, because just because it's new doesn't mean it's better. I still think The Godfather is the greatest movie of all time, but I do believe that you must fight to connect with the people that are in your community today. I was just speaking with a teacher last night, and he's been teaching for 25 years. The way he taught 25 years ago is not the way you teach now. So we have to fight to find new ways to connect with the now generation and to build community.
Okay. And then kind of one final question about just that whole process. Obviously for you, you had to step outside of yourself in a way. You had to kind of take on new responsibilities that, like you said, you never dreamed that you'd be taking on. And so I know that for a lot of people, when that opportunity comes up, it's very easy to say, I just can't do it. It's just going to be too much. It's going to be too much of a load, and especially when we live in a environment of hustle culture, where the emphasis is more on rise and grind, get up and do your thing. But when you really challenge people to try something new, they have to really kind of step outside of themselves. What would you say to people that either want to start a church or start a collective or just do anything, whether it be church related or their job or relationships, and they have to kind of escape the comfort of hustle culture sayings into, okay, this is where the work begins and I can really do it.
Yeah, that's great. I think for anybody who's starting anything, a business or organization, a nonprofit, the advice I like to give is take what you do so seriously without taking yourself so seriously. And I think that's what I found. When you become easily offendable, when you become fragile, when you become insecure, you cut yourself from the greatest resource, which is the right people. So some people say people are the greatest asset. But on the flip side, people are also your greatest liability. I believe the right people are your greatest assets. But when you take yourself so seriously and you need to be the best at all times, you become isolated. And when you become isolated, you just limit it, or you put a due date, you put an expiration date on your growth. But when you take what you do so seriously, you will know, I cannot do this alone. So I'm not going to take myself so seriously. I'm going to love what I do. I'm going to serve it, and I'm going to invite people to come on the journey with me. So I think the who is even more important than the what. I would say this. You could be at your favorite place with people you don't like, and you'll have the worst time. But if you're with your tight 3, 4 best friends, could be anywhere. You could be in the middle of the desert. You're going to have a blast. Because it's about who's on the journey with you. Because when you have the right people, it doesn't matter where you're going. You're going to have a great time. Same thing. A lot of us, we obsess with the results, but we forget it's all about the journey. And when you love the people along the way, when you bring the right people, there's no limits to how big you can build.
Okay, well said. Well said. Okay, so here on the Alex Montoya Show, we have something called the lightning round. And this is where I'm going to either ask you a question or just say one word. And I want you to say the first thing that comes to your mind. So it can be either a one word response back, or if you need to explain a little bit, that's fine. But just say the first things that come to your mind when I say these things. Okay? So here we go. So, favorite ice cream?
Rocky Road.
Okay. Favorite pizza topping not named pepperoni?
Olives.
Oh, Office. Ooh, controversial pick. Okay, The Office.
Greatest show.
Okay, Seinfeld.
The greatest show.
Well, that's gonna make this next question trickier because Office or Seinfeld.
Seinfeld.
Okay. Said with conviction. People who put clothes on dogs.
Hey, do you?
Ooh, man. I try to be that understanding. I really do. I try to be that understanding, and I'm
I just recently got a dog.
yeah.
You know what? But now I used to judge people before I had the dog. Now I have a dog. I'm trying to get my little dog a hoodie. So I might become what you hate.
Okay, okay. Because I'm like, bro, your dog sweater it costs more than what you got on. Like, we need to talk about priorities here. Okay, Los Angeles Lakers.
Oh, greatest team of all time.
Woo, love it, love it. Shout out Lakers and Luca. Are you a night owl or an early bird?
I'm an early bird.
Really? Okay.
Yes. You know what? It's seasons. Used to be a night owl. Can't hang no more.
Yeah, that's
But
true.
when you wake up, I love the peace of the morning. I love coffee. I love the quiet time. I'm a morning guy.
Okay, okay. I try, man. I try, and I'm just like sometimes I get so many. Just the day gets so crazy that I'm just like I'm gonna need like 15 hours of sleep now, and don't call me before noon. Caramel or caramel?
It's caramel.
Agreed. Agreed. Favorite taco spot?
It changes, but right now, taco machine.
Ooh, taco machine. Okay, I will check that out. Not sponsored, but if they want to reach out, they're welcome to.
I think they should sponsor.
Yes. Okay. I am with that. Hey, I'll take a trade. You give me 10,000 tacos and consider it sold. Did you ever have a MySpace?
Absolutely, I did.
What was your favorite part about it?
My favorite part was the customization. Everyone's page was so unique.
Yeah.
I was never like tech savvy, but there was ways to customize, put music, change it. Remember the top four, the top eight? I wouldn't put real people. I would put like bands or like
Yes.
movies. But it was so much fun.
And that was key because you knew that no one could be upset at you in terms of being like, bro, how am I not number two? How am I not number one? Well, Tom was always number one.
It would end friendships.
It would end friendships. And you were like, hey, man, my number two is clearly going to be Mana. So, clearly going to be the cure. So, don't at me. And yeah, you're right. That was always the best way. And it was like one day if I felt like being like gangster and rebellious, I'd put on 50 Cent. And then like the next day, my cover song would be like, some brand new Kanye or, it would be, something, I don't know, just completely soft and benign. But you're right. You could totally do it according to your mood. I miss that very much. Well, I really hope that gave people a chance to really get to know you, Abe, and to know the wonderful friend and man that you are. Like I said, there was a specific intention with inviting you to be our first guest here on the Alex Montoya What's Good podcast. I want to give a special shout out and plug to Local Church San Diego, which you created. I often say, local church saved my life, local church changed my life. And that was because your vision of creating a church, and I need to kind of get into this a little bit. Your vision of creating a church where people not only would just go to church, but build community, and the fact that nobody will walk in and just be able to walk out without somebody saying hi to them, without somebody asking them some questions. That's quite revolutionary. You can go to a million churches and they might not know your name at all. But on top of that, the fact that you made the mission, the mantra, love God and love people. When I first heard that, I thought that was so revolutionary as well, because as you've often said, it can be easy to walk in and say, I'm gonna love the Lord, I'm gonna love worship, I'm gonna love where I'm at, and that's just gonna be it. But when you challenge people to love people, that's exactly what it is. Because people are messy, people are flawed, humans are gonna make mistakes. And I mean, isn't that really kind of the basis of those great TV shows that you just mentioned, The Office and Seinfeld? Like part of the charm of those shows is how can people who are really not so likable get along? And how can we embrace each other at our weaknesses, at our flaws, and really be a family? Although Stanley would tell you they're not a family. So, I thought that was so transcendent from any church I have ever attended. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge because I know that really loving your community and loving your fellow person as much as you love yourself. I mean, there's a reason why Jesus made that one of the top principles, right? So for me, needing that community and needing that opportunity to be able to be loved and be lovable and love others, despite just everything that we're going through. I just want to thank you because it really did change my life, and it's transforming downtown San Diego and now East Lake and Chula Vista. And I know it's going to really just change all of San Diego and beyond. Is there anything else you would like to say or would like to for people to know either about you or just anything at all?
You know what? I just want to encourage people, whoever's listening, that is going through a tough time, as always, is that you're not alone. And I think that's just something that whenever I get an opportunity, and thank you for creating this moment, just to encourage anybody who is listening, who maybe just feels left out. I think you said something that's so encouraging, and it's also intentional at our community. Everyone, I want everybody to feel connected because, I mean, we all look different on the outside, but we're more similar than we know. We all want to be seen, needed, and known. So if there's anybody who is listening who feels discouraged, who feels on the outside, for them to know they're not alone. Sometimes we like to think that we are the only ones that do not fit in. We're the only ones that cannot connect. But if they take one step, in the right direction, I believe that their life can change. And I just want to thank you for having me. Man, I'm so honored to be part of your first episode. Oh my God, that's so amazing. I cannot wait for everybody to hear it. And hopefully I can come back later on and be a repeat guest. Yes. Because this was a blast, and I'm excited for you. Congrats on this. I know it's going to be an incredible journey.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to Pastor Abraham Camacho. Pastor Abe, again, he is a friend. He's a brother to me, and I just love the guy so much, and really hope you get to know him, get to know local church San Diego, again with services both in English and in Spanish. And thank you, my bro, for being here. Also want to make sure again that I thank Gomez Trial Attorneys. This podcast is brought to you by Gomez Trial Attorneys. Contact them for your personal injury, employment, and civil rights matters. Reach out to getgomez.com or 833-GET-GOMEZ. And if you are looking for a podcast studio, reach out to them as well. If you would be interested in sponsoring the Alex Montoya What's Good podcast, please reach out to us. But this would be a fantastic place for any of you looking to do a podcast. And then finally, please make sure that you like and subscribe and share. Let people know about this podcast. It is currently available on Spotify. And with that, I want to thank our executive producer, Raymond Williams. I want to thank Gomez Trial Attorneys once again, and thank all of you for tuning in. God bless. We love you. Make the world a better place. Thank you.